Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on managing everyday stress, techniques from self-advocates, parents, and supporters. We'd like to extend our thanks to Awake Labs and Addie, Diane, and Paul for presenting today. Awake Labs is a strategic partner of Community Living Ontario. They build apps to measure stress and strong emotions so people can spend more time enjoying life. You'll be hearing more about this throughout the discussion today. But before we begin, I will share a few housekeeping items. All attendee microphones are muted, but we encourage everyone to ask questions through the question panel. We've reserved time at the end of the formal presentation today for questions. The webinar will be recorded and made available to everyone who is registered within the next few days. And without further ado, I'll hand things over to Paul to kick things off.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Heather, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. Big thanks to Community Living Ontario for making this happen. And for everyone who doesn't know me, my name is Paul. I'm one of the co-founders of Awake Labs. And like Heather just mentioned, we build apps that measure stress and other strong emotions. So people who have an intellectual disability can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying life. And I'm very excited to be here today. And really, in my role, I'm mostly going to be listening to what Addie and Diane have to share with us. And speaking of which, if both Addie and Diane, if you can tell us a little bit about yourselves and why you're excited to speak with our audience today. So let's start with Addie.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, Paul, thanks so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and same with you, Diane, and hats off to Community Living Ontario also for hosting the event today. And so my name is Addie, or Adriana, whatever you prefer. And I work with Community Living Windsor, where we offer supports and services to approximately 650 people who have an intellectual disability and their families as they pursue a life they choose to live. I also work alongside my colleague Peter Marks, who is the CEO of an organization called the Centre for Conscious Care, where we work with teens and families who are supporting a loved one who may also have an intellectual disability, a developmental disability, or autism, and who also may be experiencing some heightened levels of anxiety. And so in both of my roles, managing levels of anxiety and building the skill set of emotional self-regulation has been a game changer between good service provision and excellent outcomes for people and families. And so this tool of self-regulation has also been a skeleton key for many of their professional and personal growth, and has been a welcome tool to increase satisfaction, build confidence, and authentic connections with folks. And so it's a lot of my work is working with people and families, and I'm just so honored to be a part of people's journeys. Outside of my work, I'm also an instructor with the University of Toronto's Continuing Studies program, and I'm also currently pursuing a master's in counseling psychology to eventually become a psychotherapist here in Ontario. So that's just a little bit about me and where I've come from. And so maybe I can pass it over to Diane.
Thank you very much, Addie. I'm excited about this because I get to talk about my children. I have 4 wonderful children, all adults now. And in specific, I get to talk about Jessica. Jessica is a 35-year-old nonverbal woman who is living in a supported home now. There are only 2 of them in the home with 24/7 care. Jessie comes from a very lively family with 4 children. You can imagine they all had their friends here. We had many, many family members here. Every time somebody was practicing a musical instrument, Jessie was there in the middle of it to listen. She was always very active, integrated into a very busy family. She loved camping. We used to do a lot of camping together. She loved the walks, the setting up, the sitting in front of the fire. She was blessed in that she was really born happy. This child woke up every day with a smile and still does, and ends the day exactly the same way. She was someone who seemed to get so much enjoyment out of life. It didn't matter whether it was riding in a car or eating spicy food or exploring music. She was a content and happy woman. And now she's developed an anxiety problem. So we want to help her go back and figure out how to bring the happiness back into her world as it once was.
Thanks, Diane, and thanks, Addie, for introducing yourselves like that. Addie, to bring it back to you quickly, so you've mentioned you've been involved with Community Living Windsor and Conscious Care and Support for a number of years. So I'm curious if you can share a little bit more about like your specific expertise in today's topic, which is managing everyday stress.
Yeah, sure. I just wonder maybe, Paul, if you wouldn't mind just flipping over to the next slide. And that just might help. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you. And so great question. And so just through my experience in the work that I've done with people and families, when we look at anxiety and how to manage it, there's definitely some principles to consider. And so just by simply being human, anxiety is something that naturally occurs to us as a response from our nervous system. Our body is wired that when we have an unmet need, that's maybe, not having our needs of safety and security, whether that's physically or emotionally, our system gets anxious for us to make change and do something about it. So firstly, anxiety is a normal process. We often think of anxiety solely as being a cognitive thing, or rather getting wrapped up or ruminating in thoughts. And yet great science in biomedicine and neurobiology are demonstrating that anxiety is not just derived from bad thinking, yet can stem from other systems that haven't been met, or that may just not be running as optimally. For examples, maybe there are some neurotransmitter imbalances like GABA, serotonin, or dopamine. Or maybe there's unhealthy gut flora or sensory system dysregulation, just to name a few. And so when we're looking at treating anxiety or helping folks manage their anxiety, there are lots of things to consider, and we need to approach how to manage it through a fully comprehensive lens. Secondly, all of us will experience anxiety in some way. If you can envision it on a scale of 1 to 10. Oh, Paul, you can just go back to the slide before. Thank you. If you can envision our anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10, we're often fluctuating on the scale dependent on the situation, dependent if our needs are unmet, and dependent on our level of resiliency. And keep in mind that none of us live in a vacuum. And so we also each have the opportunity to either contribute to the anxiety levels of others or alleviate them. And so today we'll be touching on some considerations for both those that we care for and support, along with us as loved ones and supporters. And then lastly, how we frame some thinking for today, and we will look at how we can intervene to help alleviate experience of anxiety. We're proposing that we look at it like a flowing river. There are things that we can do in the moment during an anxious escalation. There are considerations to be done upstream before the heightened moment. And then there are things that we need to do downriver to best increase the odds that we can reduce those heightened moments in frequency and also intensity. Much of the information that will be presented to you today is part of what we call the conscious care and support model. And so if you wouldn't mind, Paul, just flipping over to the next slide. Thank you. And so the conscious care and support model looks to build on the current treatment protocols that are out there to help manage anxiety, agitation, and aggression for those with intellectual developmental disabilities or autism. Very simply, it has two big pillars to it. On one side, presented in front of you, is what we refer to as the hierarchy of unmet needs to determine where the anxiety, agitation, and aggression could be coming from, that we can treat then much more effectively. And yet the top two go-tos here in the province to help those that we love and care for who experience heightened levels of anxiety are traditionally pharmacotherapy, so taking some medications, and behavior modification. And those tools are incredibly important and useful if the unmet need that's causing the anxiety in the first place stems from an unmet medication need or because of a need to learn a skill to challenge or change one's behavior. However, if the unmet need is coming from outside of either of those possible causes, it causes us to look much more deeply to find the root of the problem. And so that's one side of the conscious care and support model. On the other side, We look at us as supporters to more optimally and consistently bring our A game to the work that we do, especially in times when people who are anxious may need us the most. We refer to this as building the skill set of mindful emotional self-regulation, which is not unlike how you've learned many other skills in life. It just takes practice. We have often heard in times of nonviolent crisis intervention that you must fake it until you make it. And even though it seems to tide us over for a few seconds, faking it is not a long-term solution for crisis management. When we learn to build our skills of mindful emotional self-regulation, we significantly enhance the support we offer as we can skillfully bring our A game not only consistently, but also with sincere compassion. With our regulated selves, we can then co-regulate others into calm just simply by being. And so we call this the effect of neuroception or entrainment. When we're mindfully emotionally self-regulated, we can employ the skills of safe management and crisis intervention, including skills like active listening, much more skillfully because we're able to keep our front brains online to help us call upon the Rolodex of learned skills. We can be more effective at applying what we already know. And so just what's laid out here in front of you are some considerations to specifically explore when we're helping treat and manage anxiety for our loved ones and those we support, when we're looking through anxiety with the conscious care and support lens. And so just some things in front of you, really looking deeply as to what the GI, the gut and brain health, brain connection is, and really doing a deep dive to ensure that gut health is running as smoothly as it can be. Looking at emotional wellness and helping people manage through trauma and phobias and fears. Looking at brain development and something called Coherence, which we'll unpack in a couple of slides from now. And then just as another example, looking at sensory integration, making sure that we're meeting those types of needs. And so, Paul, I'll just pass that back to you for now as we continue. Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Addie. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. And I think that framework is an interesting one to keep in mind during the rest of our discussion today. Like the idea of having, the in the moment response to daily stress, but also thinking about upstream of that moment of stress and how can we identify it maybe earlier on, and what are some techniques we can use in those earlier moments, as well as downstream in reflecting on what might be causing anxiety and also how we respond to it. I think that's an interesting one to keep in mind, as well as the idea that there's a number of different things that might be contributing to the way that we feel, and can be easy to maybe forget about all of those different things in the moment. But yeah, I'm excited to learn some more about it. So Diane, maybe to flip it back to you, and I'm going to pull up the pictures of Jessie here so we can keep her in mind as we're talking.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So
yeah, sorry, I guess like there's a number of parents, there's self-advocates, there's people here in the audience who are probably just like me, relating a lot to what Addie is just talking about. And so I'm curious if you can share your own thoughts on how it resonates with you and with your own experience with Jessie.
So as you can see, Jessie has a very busy life. There's a picture of her out camping with us. She loves to dance. She adores going to restaurants, and she has many, many, many friends. Interesting enough, though, she tends to gravitate towards other nonverbal people, and there's a very, very strong communication that occurs within that community. It reminds me of when I was teaching deaf children and how relaxed, as if like that big whew, when they didn't have to deal with the speaking hearing world, and they could just be themselves with other people who were like them and processed in the same ways that they did. And that's the way it is with Jessica and her friends. They have a wonderful time. The communication flows quickly and easily, and we have so many things on the go. The picture into the it's my right. You can see Jessie's wearing her watch. There are a lot of things that we knew as a family from long-term observation. We all care for Jessie and we all love her a great deal, and it hurts us when she does not do well. So we work together very strongly as a family. And we know that, for instance, she cannot bear to have things heavy on her skin. She will not wear a hat, will not. And you have to be very careful in the kind of clothing that you purchase for her, because if it grates on her skin, it grates on her psyche, and she just cannot manage the day. So we spent considerable time with Awake Labs picking exactly the right kind of band for the watch, and there are several you can choose from. And Jessie, from the very first second, I mean, staff said, I don't think she'll wear it. I don't think she'll keep it on. And she not only wears it, but wears it proudly. She's got it all the time from when she gets up. A lot of what you said, Addie, really resonated with me. I mean, so much is that person-centered observation and the understanding that as you build your toolkit for that person, that toolkit may not have all the appropriate things to serve the needs of another person. So for Jessie, we know that bright lights are a source of irritation and upset her. So we avoid them. We know that, for instance, the large grocery store in town is not one that she can function in. It is too bright and there are too many people. However, the smaller grocery store in town has much dimmer lighting, fewer people, and not only that, community knows her there. So if we're lined up and there are 3 or 4 people ahead of us, the cashier will go, oh, look, Jessie's here. Would you mind letting her through first? Because Jessie's not good at waiting. And that's what community does for you. They didn't know that from the start, but they were attentive and they were caring, and they built a situation that would work for her. We also have learned that Jessie seems to process one thing at a time, one sense at a time. And when you put too many things together at the same time, she's like a typewriter that jams its keys, for those of you old enough to remember a typewriter. It makes it unnecessarily difficult for her and may set her off on an anxiety swirl. So we've learned to slow down, do things one at a time, and think about, before we start, how will we approach this? An example, if as a teacher, I was a teacher for 37 years, I often use something called scaffolded learning, which means that I planned ahead of time, knowing the child, how to introduce the kind of learning or the kind of information that they needed to have as a citizen. And for Jessie, everything has to be scaffolded. You have to think about every step in the process, or it's too scary. My husband and I decided early on that Jessie would be as normal and treated in as normal and experience as normal a life as all our other children. And we made the decision that while in this day and age, children have been known to live with their moms and dads till 30, after 30, it stinks for everybody. You're just too much in each other's face, and it doesn't allow anybody to grow. So we knew right from the start that by age 30, we wanted her into a supported home. And that meant that we started with respite 1 night a week. And we did that for 2 or 3 years. And then it was 2 nights a week for 2 or 3 years. And then it was 2 nights a week in the home that she would eventually live in. And then it was 3 nights a week in the home she would eventually live in. And my husband and I went in between times. We completely decorated what would be her new room. We set it up in the way that we know Jessie likes to have her things. And on the day we brought her there, she literally showed us the door. Jessie was at home. And that was because of good planning with staff and family. One other thing, I guess, Addie, I was really interested to see you talk about gastrointestinal. That's huge. I, I often wondered, we live on an organic farm and we make our own bread, we make our own jams and jellies. Everything is homemade here. There are no preservatives, there's no fast food. And I often wondered if if that had an impact on keeping her so calm, because really she was very calm in her, or whether it's just something that has emerged since moving away from home. There's a lot of changes from moving away from home, and not insignificant among them is diet. I suspect she's getting processed foods for the first time in her life.
Yeah, I don't know, Addie, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, well, definitely the research is out there to show that the gut-brain connection is incredible. And we often think that our brain drives the show most of the time and how we live, but research is showing us it's not our brain, it's actually our gut. And of what we eat, we truly are becoming what we eat. And so there's been some fabulous research locally and internationally looking specifically at those who have a developmental intellectual disability or autism, and specifically looking at certain types of infections that grow in the guts of those who have that label or have that disability. And there are certain things that we can do to help treat that and manage that. But if we look traditionally through the traditional lenses, and don't consider the importance of gut health, we'll constantly be putting a Band-Aid over the solution, right? We'll constantly be, helping somebody change the way and how they respond in the world around them, but they might be having incredible gut pain coming from an infection that we haven't treated yet. And so we have to look much more comprehensively, and gut health is incredibly important with that and helping alleviate anxieties.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And yeah, I think that ties into our theme of it's important to look below the surface and to consider a lot of different things that might be impacting how we feel and how, and our emotions. Diane, I do want to bring it back to you for a couple of things that kind of jumped out at me. One of which was this idea that, you talked a lot about how your whole family came behind supporting Jessie moving into her own home, and the same idea when you have a lot of staff who are involved in that process. So I'm curious if you have anything that you can share with us today about maybe some of the challenges or some things to consider when it comes to bringing such a large group of people together, and how to build, I guess, some consistency in how all of that, that big group of people is supporting Jessie.
Yeah. Well, in the early days of school, which would be her first transition out of family, it was much easier. I had developed a small duotang, which she carried with her all the time, and it was marked on her backpack to refer to the duotang, so that no matter who you were, you knew there was something there. And it was very simple at first. It was her likes and dislikes, and her cues and appropriate responses. So there were things that we knew as a family would work that someone who didn't know Jessie might not know. IPRC was a good process for us. It isn't for everybody. I suspect that being a teacher in the system helped me a great deal. I know that in the past, I've also helped other parents through it. In IPRC, we had a huge team. We had the director, the executive director of the local community living, who sat in as part of our IPRC. We had the EA, we had the teacher, we had my husband, myself, we had somebody in the community who knew Jessie and worked with her in the community setting. It was a big group. I think there were about 8 or 9 of us, and that's unusual. Most IPRCs really are only 3 people, and sometimes the parent feels very much alone as a lone voice. And we didn't have that. That wasn't our experience. So we had a really good time in the elementary system, and then things changed. Somewhere around grade 6, She received an EA who was very different from other EAs. She was very product-oriented rather than people-oriented. And the decision was made with her impetus to remove Jessie from her inclusive classroom, which had been very helpful in the past because when you took a walk in town, people would go, "Hi, Jessie, that's Jessie's dad." So that was really helpful. And I knew that there was safety in that because if Jessie happened to wander away and be alone, a whole pile of people in town would know that's Jessie Bennett. She's not supposed to be alone. And they would step in and help. There's safety there. Community brings safety when you're known. But she was pulled out of her community and she was sent to a high school quite far away. She had to travel half an hour, 45 minutes in a car to get there, half an hour, 45 minutes on the way home. And there it was not person-centered. Again, it was very, very much product-centered. And I'll give you an example. So I went in when I had bought Jessie a radio for school, and she loves music. So she would turn the radio on, she'd find a station she loved, and then she'd groove to it. And I went in one day and I said, "Oh, where's Jessie's radio?" And they said, "Well, we had them make a wooden box and we've put it in there and we've locked it." And I said, "Oh, really? Can you give me she says, "Well, she kept touching it." "Yes, it's her radio." "Yes." "Well, there were other things she needs to do." I said, "Okay. What project is she working on?" They said, "Well, we have this thick cord and we have these beads and we want her to put the beads on the string. And she just won't do it. She just keeps going over to the radio." And I said, "Well, why is it she is putting beads on the string?" "Well, because we need to teach her fine motor coordination." And I said, "Oh, tell me when in her life she's going to need to put beads on a string." And they were gobsmacked. And I said, "Okay, is not working with her radio fine motor skill? And this is a skill that she would use for the rest of her life." But because they weren't bringing their A game, as Addie says, they were looking at the product and not the person. They were looking at a program that they knew from other times and other contexts. And this was not a Jessie-centered program. It was really tough. It was really tough for Jessie. That's when her anxiety began to build. And they found a way to deal with her because remember, she comes from a very active family. They set up a bed in a small room and they put her to sleep for most of the day, which meant she was awake most of the night, which meant that for 10 years, neither Jessie nor Mommy got to sleep at night. And that was really, really tough on everybody. That upset the family dynamic and made it really difficult. So much is about building the toolkit that works for the person and finding that way to address anxiety in meaningful ways. I mean, I know, for instance, that anxiety runs in our family. My dad had an anxiety disorder. I have an anxiety disorder. Two of my other children have anxiety disorders. But we are able to work with because we can speak and we're verbal and we can sit and de-escalate using our words and using we can name them. We can, and because we can name them, we can move to next steps. But Jessie can't name them. She can't tell us exactly what she's feeling. She is confused and she needs help in order to get her to identify what she can do to de-escalate in a situation. And that's where the watch becomes really important, because it was really, really hard to get staff to be consistent in their approach to helping Jessie find her way towards a happy, normal life. Over time, the duotang had become a binder, and then the binder grew into something I call the life book. I've made one for all of my children. They're baby pictures, baby book, them all through, not every picture, every toe, but it's journaled all the way through. Every hospital stay, every drug that was administered, the name of every doctor. I mean, this is a huge tool. Things that worked and don't work now, things that work now that may, or maybe thought of in the future. Everything's in the life book, and I've asked staff to add to it. And here's the problem: when you have staff who are not regular staff in the home, they often don't know to sit down with either the binder or the life book and get to know the client. All they know is they're in that house for that night. They just want to make sure there's no blood and everything's quiet. It's tough because they don't understand what their A game is as yet. They just think that I'm in there one night, I just have to make it work. And that doesn't always work for Jessie. Now, we do know, and this is helpful, that with Jessie, people can change if places stay the same, which means that when we have here at our home, it is not unusual to have 60 people at our house, tons of people barbecue, because it's easier for people to come to us than for us to go to them. And we've learned that places can change as long as people are consistent. So she's able to tolerate changing workers. But tolerate is not living. Tolerate is not a happy, involved lifestyle. So, the watch was a really good way, I think, to bridge that gap between the binder and the life book and staff, because many of our younger staff are coming in with a very strong technological bent. That's their world. They live with their phones. They live on their phones. That is the life that they have. Many of them may never own a computer. They use their phone. So to have something like the watch that will indicate on Jessie's iPhone, oh, Jessie's starting to feel a little bit anxious. She doesn't look anxious to me. Maybe I should just check in. And you go and you might rub her palm, or you might sing a song, or you might put on a piece of music that you know she particularly likes. You didn't know that escalation was starting. You didn't know. But the watch helped staff to recognize that she hasn't got to explosion yet. Let's head this off at the pass. We can see the ball just starting to roll up. Maybe we should check in and figure out what's going on. And then when they can't pull up something from their own toolkit, if they're new, for instance, then they can go to the binder, then they can go to the book. But really, the watch has become the first step for staff. And, each person has the ability to make comments on the watch. So, for instance, she may be at a very high reaction, but she's not explosive. What she is absolutely delighted because it's happy birthday for somebody. I can put that in as a comment that, she was so excited because somebody was having a birthday. And so that becomes part of the feed. Or it might be, Jessie was very unhappy, waiting for supper to be put on the table. And that was the reason for the escalation. So it gives consistent information. You can see up to 2 days data. And so coming in new, just looking at the iPhone, you can see everybody else's comments, and you can see Jessie's levels for the last 2 days, and you can know, oh, I didn't know that was going on. That helps build consistency. Now, I will admit it is less successful with some of our older staff because perhaps like me, they didn't learn to live with a phone on the end of their arm. And sometimes new technology can be scary. But you know, they didn't enter this profession because they didn't like people. They entered this profession because they had a feeling that they could give to others, that they could support others. And so over time, they get familiar with it and they're less and less afraid. But it didn't happen by accident. Sometimes people have to be shown many times, many ways, and that's okay.
For sure.
And you have to be patient. I mean, there were many, many people who resisted Jessie having the watch. You have to give people permission to take the time they need. If we're willing to grant Jessie the time that she needs to transition towards new learning and new habits, then we have to be able to give our staff time to transition. Now, if somebody puts the brakes on and says, I'm just plain not going to do it, that's a whole other situation. And we haven't had that come up because, as I say, people who work in our group homes are special people who really do care about the work that they do.
Amazing. Yeah, I couldn't agree more based on all the people that we worked with. But I really appreciate that, Diane. That was thank you for sharing all of that. And I think it ties into really well with what I'm hoping that Addie's going to help share and enlighten us on. You talked a lot about staff training and some of those competencies and those skills that people learn. And I believe Addie has a lot of insight to share about that. And before I do bring it over to you, Addie, I just want to remind people as well that there will be a little bit of time to go over questions. So if you do have them, please share them in the chat. So Addie, take it away, please. And thanks again, Diane.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you so much for just sharing all of your insights and story as well. It's just lovely to get to know Jessie a little bit more through your storytelling. So thank you. Just wondering, Paul, if you wouldn't mind to go to the next slide. And we'll just focus now on what can we do upstream to help those that we love and support with their levels of anxiety, but then also what can we do for us? And so when we look at how we can help upstream, firstly, we have to catch ourselves in our own biases. And like how you've mentioned, Diane, when you said that supporters were stating how Jessie needs to put beads on the string, right? We have to catch ourselves in our own bias here. And so that we can offer support to catch our drivenness to our less than optimal selves. And so I just have a really quick video to share with you, and just follow along with what the video asks, and that's it. So maybe Paul, do you mind just bringing up that video?
Are you able to see this on my screen?
Yes.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half miss the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Great, thanks for that, Paul.
No worries.
And so this was just a fun example of how we often miss subtle cues or interpret situations of others through our own lens. We each have a cognitive bias that will distort our worldview from that of reality. And so that's also pretty normal. These distortions can come from, what we call the primitive predispositions or the genetics part of us, the nature of you. It can come from upbringing and social dynamics, things that we call the nurture part of you, and also our cultural influences and stereotypes, which we refer to as the numbed out part of you. And so simply applying this to the lens of helping those manage anxiety, most often your cognitive bias will mindlessly pull you into your less than optimal game. What the person may be experiencing on a scale rating of 1 to 10 may be for them a subjective 8 level, but your bias may tell you that they're experiencing it at a level that's a 3 end of the continuum, or that someone you support always seems to get anxious and you can't understand it, often because you're seeing them in reference to your own point of view rather than theirs. Or perhaps you always get into power struggles with the person and you're just trying to help. This doesn't mean that you're a bad person. Again, your cognitive bias is often the culprit at the root of that power struggle. And so how does one calm the drivenness of our bias? Well, through practices of self-awareness and building the skill set of emotional self-regulation. By being able to catch ourselves in our drivenness, we can interrupt the pattern of the drivenness to then approach the situation more objectively, clarifying the needs of the person and supporting them in a way which they need to lower their anxiety. And so some skills of self-awareness to build that emotional self-regulation include activities of self-reflection. And so asking yourself, what did I do today that had an impact on others? How did that conversation go with that person today? If I had the chance to do it all over again, what would I have done differently? Maybe doing some work around identifying your values, your assumptions, your beliefs, your expectations in life. Really doing the inner work to know all about us and what we bring as part of our individual human experience. And again, practicing presence. Being present in the moment helps build that skill set of awareness and self-regulation, which is often hard to do as our brain is wired to either live in the future to be prepared for what's to come, or living in the past to remind us of what's happened before. And so presence helps us with our awareness in the moment. And so we need to practice being present, not unlike how you would practice going to a gym to build muscles and build strength and improve your cardio. It just takes practice. And one of the major tools that's out there in the marketplace of life to increase presence and self-awareness, along with building your skill set of emotional self-regulation, is called the Tool of Mindfulness. And so as we mentioned earlier, when we consider helping those we support and love upstream with their levels of anxiety, we have to think more comprehensively here. Anxiety does not just stem from unwanted thoughts. And even when anxiety is stemming from that cognitive door, there's something underneath it, which causes the need for us to drive a little bit more deeply to find the root. And so incredible research has been done on the gut-brain connection as it relates to one's mental health. And studies are continuing to prove that you are what you eat. The neurotransmitters you have today came from the food that you ate yesterday. And so our levels of feeling good neurotransmitters come from what we ate. It's based on our nutrition. So gut infections like Candida or Clostridia, intolerances like gluten or casein sensitivities, and vitamin and mineral imbalances are often culprits that will set up the person's level of irritability, which will then lead to them feeling stronger anxiety than those without infections, intolerances, and imbalances. Brain coherence simply means that our brain has enough electromagnetic energy in it to be able to make sense of the world around us as we perceive messages that come through our sense doors. If one's brain coherence is low, this will increase anxiety in the system, therefore pushing the person closer to overwhelm. And so through the great work of John Rady and other neuroscientists across the globe, acts of bouncing and balancing, along with cardio exercises, amps up our brain energy, enabling better coherence to then make clearer sense of the world around us, in turn lowering our experiences of anxiety. And then looking as we tie into brain coherence, investigating what sensory needs one might have, and ensuring if there is any dysregulation that it's treated properly and consistently through what we refer to as a sensory diet. Getting support from a skilled occupational therapist will absolutely help you with this. And as we bring those we love and support, as we help those that we love and that we support engage in these activities and tools to address the unmet sensory need, this will lower their overall system's level of anxiety, contributing to their increased brain coherence, and in turn, lowering their scale rating of anxiety. And then lastly, based on the science of acupressure, acupuncture, energy systems, and neuroscience, including mirror neuron response and social neurobiology, these bilateral biomeridian awareness-based calming tools are tools that have been used to, again, calm one's nervous system. So tapping one side and then the other with acupressure points on the body, along with that sensorial input that can come from tapping, can again calm the nervous system by recalibrating it for it to prefer a calmer state. And so there is lots that we can do upstream, absolutely. And a lot of the work that we use or focus on with conscious care and support is looking at upstream, looking at addressing those unmet needs for the person who is receiving our service, and also for us, what do we need to do to fine tune our skills to make sure that we can bring our A game? And so there are many more things that we can unpack for sure as we look upstream, but I thought I'd just share those nuggets with you today because perhaps they'll resonate with some knowledge that you already have, or maybe it'll influence you to maybe dive a little bit more deeply in exploring and learning outside of today's session. And so wondering, Paul, if maybe we can move on to how we might be able to help somebody in the moment. Great, thank you. And so very simply, we cannot underestimate our contribution in the moment to a possibly escalating situation. And I'm also still looking for the door upon which to leave my luggage when entering such a situation. I have a suspicion that it might not exist. And that's why much of what we need to remind ourselves of how to manage our response in a time of escalation must happen regularly before we get there. We need to be prepared and read our safety plans, our support plans, educate ourselves in crisis intervention and the art of conversation during escalation, and also familiarize ourselves on how someone we support may experience their anxiety so that we can intervene effectively and in a timely way. But when the rubber hits the road, all of those amazing tools and skills that we have in the toolbox will be forlorn if our front brain isn't online to employ them. If we get pulled into an emotional hijack of anxiousness, fear, anger, our front brains go offline and we respond with our less than optimal self that is driven by our less evolved self, along with those distortions and biases. This speaks to the importance of building our skill set of emotional self-regulation upstream so that we can respond more objectively and effectively in the moment. And so we call this the catch, calm, clarify, choose, and connect model. Catching ourselves in the moment through self-awareness and noticing our own selves in the moment of escalation is incredibly important for us to be able to then calm ourselves and calm the person that we're with, and make sure that we can keep our front brain online so that we can clarify the needs of the person, of ourselves, and of the situation, so that we can then choose how to respond to best meet the needs that we've clarified. Then we can much more optimally connect with the person in the moment to provide more optimal support in a way, in a time, and where they've called upon you the most to step in and help. And so another interesting point that's worth mentioning is this concept of neuroception, or emotional contagion or entrainment. Simply by being a certain way, we can influence others to respond in a similar manner. If we approach a situation with escalation outside of the words we say or the gestures we use, the nervous system of the other person picks up on the response of your nervous system, in turn influencing them to increase their anxiety. And the same as with vice versa. If we can regulate our autonomic nervous system and approach a situation with greater sense of calm, the same will happen. Our nervous system will influence theirs to follow a similar suit. Calm begets calm, fear begets fear. And so again, this just speaks to the importance of ensuring we are doing our work upstream to build our skill of emotional self-regulation in order for us to bring our A game in the moment. And all it takes is practice to get there. And so when we look at supporting those we love and support in the moment, this is when we call upon the tools we know work well, including the ones where we have spent time upstream to help regulate their nervous system. Recognizing that, as Diane, you've shared, this is incredibly person specific. And so this could be a motley list of possibilities depending on the person that you're with. And so some things to consider exploring, if you have yet to do so, could be some things that are presented in front of you. Looking at, relying on the tools and activities outlined in someone's sensory diet and making any modifications that you can to the environment at that time. Bringing in those bilateral biomeridian awareness-based calming exercise, like butterfly hugs, which is simply tapping one side and the other on the upper arm, or doing some collarbone activation, which again is just tapping on the pressure points underneath the collarbone. And again, you've done this upstream and normalized it so it becomes another tool in the toolbox for the person to go to in their moment of stress to help regulate that nervous system. Or even something like mindful breathing, which is simply taking a breath in to the count of 3 and slowly exhaling to the count of 6. By simply doing that, if you were to do that yourself, after 5 times, you're going to start to notice that your body starts to feel a little bit calmer. And it's because you've done a wonderful job at regulating your nervous system. And so it starts to recalibrate and prefer being much calmer. And lastly, wondering if we can just touch on just keeping the eye on time as well. What are some considerations downriver, right? And so we've looked at and recognized all of the importance upstream. I've covered some tools that maybe you can consider when you're in the moment with anxiety and stress. And what do we do now downriver? And so some things to consider, when we look at us as supporters, it really comes to building our own skill sets. We have to consistently sharpen our tools of awareness, catch the drivenness of our biases, and build our skills of regulation through practice. One of the suggested ways of building self-regulation is, as we've mentioned, through the practice of mindfulness, by paying attention to what is happening in any given moment and infusing it with a sense of what we call equanimity or allowingness. This practice of awareness and allowingness is what recalibrates our nervous system and enables us to gain much more clarity and insight surrounding our drivenness from the nature, nurture, and numbed out parts of our human experience. This then enables us to grow our skill set of emotional self-regulation, which can then also influence the co-regulation of others. We must also continue to educate ourselves and commit to lifelong learning. We know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And so stay open and curious along your journey of professional and personal growth. Paying attention and building trusting relationships we know can help reduce the feelings of uneasiness that can influence anxiety levels. As Diane has mentioned, taking time to really hear someone and get to know them, really know them, like how they see themselves know them, not just how you see them know them, builds trusting relationships. We must ensure that we're learning from the person we love and support. And when we mess up or we make a mistake, we own it. And we explain to the folks that we commit to doing better next time. And then to seal the deal on the relationship, we have to stay true to our promise. And we have to stay committed to really doing better next time. When we look downriver at supporting those we love and those we support, some things to consider. Look at the support circle and notice who isn't there. For example, if we know the great importance of GI health or gastrointestinal health, the biomedical intricacies that come with that, and how it affects anxiety, who is on the care team to bring that lens of expertise? And more often than not, through my experience, it's not necessarily always the general practitioner. More often than not, that level of knowledge is held with someone like a naturopath or a registered holistic nutritionist. We also have to consider looking at adjusting our support strategies to ensure that we're providing support that meets the unmet need in the first place. This is where the technology of Awake Labs has been really helpful. It's enabled us to look for trends and patterns outside of outward manifestations of anxiety for us to then formulate a different understanding or a different plan of support to better meet the needs of the person. We've been able to collect and reflect on the information provided by the technology to help us do the deeper dives in exploring those unmet needs. And lastly, always celebrate moments of personal growth through hardship. It's a wonderful way to remind folks that they have faced adversity in the past. They have managed and overcome similar situations, which can then support their level of awareness and also increase their level of resiliency. And so now I have the privilege to introduce you to Leeda. And so Leeda is a young woman that I have come to know who has been using the Awake Labs technology for the past few years now. And so she would just like to share with you what this technology has provided her as she manages her own levels of anxiety.
Thanks so much, Addie. And before I press play, we tested this. There might be an issue with the sound, and I do apologize. We do have subtitles on the video, and we will be sharing a link to this so you can hear it for yourselves. Good, thank you. We have a couple of minutes left before I'm going to turn it to questions. So just maybe Addie and Diane, once again, thanks so much for taking part in this and for sharing all of your wisdom with our audience today. I'm wondering if you just have like a couple of closing thoughts, things that you want to share before we go to questions. Maybe I'll start with Addie and we'll close with Diane.
Yeah, that sounds good. And so I guess just one overall, or maybe two overall things that I can think of. Number one, think big, but start small. And so recognize that there's many things to consider as we provide optimal support to those we love and those that we serve, but we have to start somewhere. And so never lose the frame of reference of the potentials and possibilities that someone can live, but we just need to start small and stay consistent with our approach, ensuring that it's person-centered. Along with, my second point would be, don't underestimate how much you contribute to this, right? As a supporter, you can either contribute to an anxious moment for it to perpetuate, or you can contribute to help alleviate. And so it really is on us as supporters to ensure that we're doing as much as we can upstream so that we can provide truly optimal, meaningful supports and very skillful. And you know, we can definitely become much more effective as supporters, but not just in our skill sets of, you know, all of what I referred to as the Rolodex of learning, but you can increase your compassion as you do it. And so I just wanted to share that's a huge piece of the work that you do. And that's just something I've given you some skills to explore, maybe to help you become much more optimal in your role as a professional and also possibly in your personal life.
Great. And sorry, Addie, if people do want to learn more about this, is there a way that they can connect with you directly?
Yeah, for sure. And so we can reach out to my email. I always take emails. My email is my first name, Adriana, Adriana, at clwindsor.org. I'm very open to answering questions that way. Or if you'd like to peruse a little bit more about the conscious care and support model and do a little bit of self-learning first and then formulate a question, you can check out the Center for Conscious Care website and just type in Center for Conscious Care in the Google search bar, and you'll be led to a whole bunch of resources there to explore. And you can also ask a question through the website there.
Great. Thanks, Addie. Diane, do you want to bring us home?
Well, I don't know if I can do that. Addie's done such an amazing job. But I do want to say I really connected to the upstream, in the moment, and downstream piece. It's very much like what we do as teachers. You know, it's all about the planning and the individual planning that goes in. And it's all about the reflection afterwards. And the in the moment is probably the least important part of the process. If you set things up well in the beginning and you take the time to reflect on, well, what worked, what didn't work, why did that, it's worked before, why did it not work this time? Those are really important questions to be asking yourself. And it really resonated with me too about how unless we examine our own intentions, it's easy to bring our own cultural bias. I've seen that. I know that there have been some staff who've come in who've never worked with a nonverbal person before. And as a result, Jessie and her housemate are both nonverbal. They don't speak to them. They don't speak to them. It's like they're ghosted. They're invisible. And just because people don't speak doesn't mean that they don't hear tone and uh, they don't feel connection. And so, you know, if there had been some upstream thinking and then afterwards some reflection, some downstream thinking, I think their next opportunity of working in that home would be better. And they wouldn't have to fear an escalation, for instance, noise or whatever, because Jessie and her partner can be very, very loud if they feel as though their needs are not being met. So thank you, Addie. That I've learned a good deal.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Oops, sorry about that. All right, last thing before we go into questions, I do have a couple of announcements. So first, Awake Labs, we actually have 3 watches and licenses to give away to self-advocates and families in Ontario. And if you're still asking yourself what exactly is it that we're giving away, it is a Samsung Galaxy smartwatch like the one that I'm wearing right now. It's installed with our app, and our app uses an algorithm that was developed by a team of scientists at Holland Bloorview to measure strong emotions in real time, like stress, anger, or excitement, like we talked about today. The watch sends a notification to an app on your phone to let you know, when those strong emotions are increasing. And as we've heard from Addie, from Diane, and from Leeda, you can use that as a prompt to check in and address the situation. So the information about the giveaway is on the screen. If you're interested, if you live in Ontario and the person who would be wearing the watch is an adult, just shoot me an email at paul@awakelabs.com, and we have 3 of them to give away. And one last thing, the technology is covered under Passport. And so if you are a self-advocate or a family, you can actually purchase it directly through our website. And if you represent an agency, I would just ask that you contact me directly at paul@awakelabs. So that's it for me. Thanks again, Addie and Diane. Thanks everyone for joining. And Heather, I'm going to flip it over to you so we can address a few questions in the time we have left.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone. It was a great presentation. I do see there's a couple here. You may have answered them, but let me just go through here. The first one, when you refer to coherence, which might have been earlier in the presentation, is this the same concept as referenced by, it looks like HeartMath? I'm not familiar with this, but are you?
I am, yeah. Hats off to those who typed in. Yeah, for sure. I am familiar with the HeartMath Institute and the great work that they're doing there. HeartMath Institute's also done some really great work looking at heart rate variability. And so that just simply means looking at your resting heart rate and your heart rate at its maximum cardiovascular level. And so when we can increase that heart rate variability, we can actually lower that person's resting heart rate, again, lowering their sense of anxiety. Many of the folks that we support or that we love and care for, their resting heart rate doesn't sit below 90 beats a minute. And so we can really do some cardiovascular training there to help increase that heart rate variability. And so my knowledge of the HeartMath Institute is looking more specifically with coherence with the heart rate variability. The coherence that I was speaking to is more specifically around brain coherence and just ensuring that our brain energy is working as optimally as it can to make sense of all of the information that's coming through our sense stores. And so slightly different, but hats off to the person that asked about the coherence through HeartMath Institute. Good work.
Great, and just a couple more questions here. Paul, I see one that says, is there a wearable sensor watch suitable for a small child?
There we go. Of course, I muted myself. So the work that we do is specifically centered around adults who have an intellectual disability. However, the team at Holland Bloor Views, the ones who developed the algorithm that we use, will actually be starting more research centered specifically on younger kids. So how to apply this algorithm and how to improve this technology specifically for kids. And so to whoever wrote that question, if you are interested in learning more about that, one of the things you can do is just send me an email and I'd be able to connect you with the folks over at Holland Bloor View who would have a lot more information around that research.
Great, thank you. Could you share some literature on where they can get more information about gut flora and anxiety? Do you have a place, Addie, that you would recommend?
Yeah, so many. I could list out a whole bunch, but a really great resource, a locally grown resource, is the work of Derek McFabe, Dr. Derek McFabe, who is a lead researcher at the Kylie Patchell Evans Institute for Autism based in London, Ontario. And they've done some fabulous research looking specifically at the guts of those who have autism and looking at the imbalances there. So I would really strongly suggest, if that's specifically who you're looking for, the work of Dr. Derek McFabe is a great resource. There's tons, gosh, even just to look on PubMed, if you're doing a Google search, make sure you're hopping on PubMed, and they have a lot of evidence-based, peer-reviewed research and coming from all different populations of folks. You can see the definite connection between gut health and mental health, such as anxiety, depression, even in some situations, mental health disorders like schizophrenia as well. So PetBed would be a great place to look. And if you really wanted to check out as well, we've got at the Center for Conscious Care website, under the hierarchy of needs, under the resources, we've actually got the GI space there that looks at that specific unmet need, and there's some resources under there for you to peruse. But if you want to nerd it out a little bit more, just feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to send more.
Well, Addie, do you mind either typing in or spelling out the name of that Dr. Derek McVeigh from London so people can look him up?
I think I can do that.
Maybe while Addie gets that, Paul, I do have a question. Is there a wearable for the Awake system that would be suitable for an adult that can't stand wearing a watch?
Good question. So that's something that comes up quite a bit, and I think Diane, you did mention that at first when you're talking about introducing the watch to Jesse. So the one that we use is a Samsung Galaxy Watch, and one of the benefits from that is the fact that you can purchase like a whole bunch of different bands to use for your watch. So I'm just using the standard one right now, but if you go on Amazon, there's a ton of different options that have different fabrics. You can have like a nylon one, you can have a Velcro clasp, like there's a whole bunch of options. And so one of the things that we found when there are people that we work with who might have some concerns around sensory sensitivities, a lot of the times just purchasing a different kind of watch band really helps. But outside of that, I think the other thing that's really helped for some people is spending some time maybe practicing wearing a different kind of watch or a different kind of bracelet and getting used to the idea of wearing something on your wrist. At this point in time, like the wristwatch, like that form factor is really the only one that we have. And so those two things are the best kind of strategies that we found to date to help with people who have a little bit more sensory sensitivity.
And I think we can just add on to that too. That's a beautiful opportunity for someone to dive more deeply to really looking at what someone's sensory needs are. And so this watch strap may not work right now, but after doing some really good upstream work, who knows, in 6 weeks from now, it might be effective.
Excellent, thank you. We have just a couple minutes left, Paul, but one of the questions I see here, which I think you mentioned briefly, but it always helps to close out, the name of your app, and can you tell a little bit more about the watch, how it works, and where you get it? So maybe that's a great way to close today.
Sure, no, I'd be happy to do that. So the name of the company is Awake Labs. It's the logo on the bottom there. Surprisingly enough, our app does not have a name outside of just the Awake Labs technology. So if you have an idea, I'm always happy to hear it. But what the technology uses, and I'll just take it off so you can see it. What we use is an existing wearable device called the Samsung Galaxy smartwatch. Oops, looks like this. So mine's running our app right now. And essentially what it does is it uses an algorithm that was developed by a team of scientists at Holland Bloorview Hospital. And that algorithm essentially measures in real time someone's levels of strong emotions. And strong emotions can include things like stress and anxiety, but also anger, fear, or even something positive like excitement. So we measure that whole range of strong emotions. And it's measured by the watch, and it's all transferred over to a mobile app that you can have, for example, on your phone. And so all the information is received on the phone in real time. And when we measure that your levels of strong emotions are starting to increase, we'll actually send a notification to the application on your phone, and you can use that as an opportunity to check in and hopefully use some of those upstream strategies because the notifications are really designed to be sent early on in that process of escalation where those upstream strategies might still be effective. And if you want to learn more about it, there's the two best ways to do that are either to look on our website, which is awakelabs.com, like you see on the screen, or maybe you don't see on the screen anymore because oh no, you do.
No, we do.
The other thing for you to do would just be to send me an email at paul@awakelabs.com, and I'm always happy to chat.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you today. It was very informative, and we appreciate all of you who joined us and asked questions. And we will be sending the recording just as a reminder. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.